there are particular ways in which we have all been trained to perceive. Trained from school, trained from just life, trained from language, trained from media, trained from our intergenerational learning. You know, it's everywhere. The training is everywhere of how life is. And Gio this morning invited us to look at our hands. It's an exercise that I often use too, but in a slightly different configuration. And if you look at your hands and you imagine what, if you were alive 8,000 years ago, what would you be doing with these things? What would they hold? What would they make? Who would they heal? What would you do with your hands in a day if you were alive 8,000 years ago? If you were born in the top of the Himalayas or in the desert or in the outback, what would you do with your hands? And this is because it's really seductive to fall into the idea of how life is. This is just how life is. But what do we mean by that exactly? What do you mean, how life is? These two-legged humanoids have been living in a lot of different ises. And how life is not how life is. It's just one possibility of how life is. But it's so seductive to believe that this is how life is. This is what things are. This is how things work. This is how it goes. That we are caught looking for that which is somewhere else in the familiar. That which is lurking in the strange combinings, the untamed ways that our stories are overlapping and shaping each other. And this was really sort of the reason that I felt it was important to think about what information might be if information itself was alive. What if information was alive? Then what would we do? Like, what are the actual implications of that? If it was alive, it would be moving, it would be shaping, it would be responding to other things. Which would mean it would be difficult to capture. In fact, that's an interesting word, speaking of decolonization. What are we capturing? Harnessing, controlling. I did some work for with my International Bateson Institute on a research project on how systems get unstuck. And we thought that was a super clever question. I can give you a shortcut and tell you it's not. It's not a super clever question because when you actually get into the nitty-gritty of how systems get unstuck, you have to first find a stuck system. And to find a stuck system, what we learned is you have to draw a pretty tight circle around just that part of a system. Because what you see pretty readily is that there's lots of aspects all around that stuck spot, that seemingly stuck spot, that are changing wildly to help that one thing stay still. In other words, it takes a lot of change to keep something still in a living system. But, you know, having come up with a bad question, the best thing to do is pursue it. So we did. And the best sort of example, the most apt kind of example we could find of a stuck system was paralysis, the body in paralysis. That's a living system with a stuckness. I'm looking for a marker, but I don't see one up here. Does anybody have a fat marker? And so I went to this clinic that was working with all these ideas, some of which came from my dad. And the way that to see how they were dealing with paralysis. And what I saw there, pretty much to this day, I would hold as being the most impressive, elegant, systemic work I've ever seen. It is absolutely the inspiration for what you just did. And what they did, oh, here comes my marker, good. I hadn't intended to tell you this story, but then I realized I have to. Thank you.
Are you okay with this one?
I think so, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to use your imagination. Picture, if you will, that this is a small wooden block, and on this small wooden block is a carved spiral, okay? So, when the practitioner was in communication with the patient, the practitioner said, what would it feel like if you could run your finger around this spiral that was carved into a piece of wood? Just with your words, what do you imagine it would feel like? Now that's interesting, because there's many forms of cognition in the body, in the person. Let's say in the person. All right, some of them are visual. Some of them are verbal. Some of them are memory. Some of them are hearing. Some of them are relational. Some of them are smells. Some of them are balance. Right? All of these different kinds of cognition are coming together. They're combining. So when the practitioner asks, what would it feel like, just to hypothesize, the person has to actually pull many forms of cognition into a combining process, right? That's a verbal process, but it's also memory, and it's also tactile, and it's also language, and it's in relationship to the practitioner, and it's in the relationship to the person's past and their life. It might be texture-based, it might be temperature-oriented. So all these different ways of sensing and knowing are combining and coming together. And in each patient, they're coming together differently. The language is different, the description is different. The way that each person starts to hypothesize is different. There's no right or wrong answer. There's only the making of the possibility of the combining and the recombining. And no one is saying what the preferred outcome is. No one's measuring for outcome. So then after that, the person does, they explain how they feel, and then after that, the practitioner actually takes their finger and runs it around this thing very, very slowly and says, not what did you feel, but what was the difference? What was the difference between what you felt and what you thought you would feel? That's a pretty complex question, actually. Because in order to answer that, you have to think about what you thought you felt, what you actually felt, and how you would describe the difference. So it's actually 3 experiences that are getting described at once. So this is, again, bringing lots of forms of cognition into being, in relationship, in conversation. This is very elegant systemic work. Because you might look at this little spiral and say, what the hell does that have to do with paralysis? All right? This is not what you might look at and say, this is first order direct corrective. First order direct corrective goes right for the part that is paralyzed and tries to pull it open. Tries to open it. This is a process that's actually looking to the whole person in their world. How is the person making sense of their world? How are they learning to be in their world? It looks nothing like the many practices of, people boards on the hand to open it and do all sorts of things to make the paralysis open. But this is a whole different approach. So this is what you just did in another way. Can you see that? All right, I gave you a question, and you had lots of contexts, and you storied into them, and the stories combined, and they combine with each other in any way they want to. I told you couldn't be clever because it doesn't really matter what you said. What matters is the combining, right? So we learned from this that we were asking the wrong question, that the question is not how do systems get unstuck, the question is how do systems learn. And then pretty soon I realized if that's the question, what are we going to do about information? Where is the information? How am I going to research this? Because, let's say you're learning to play violin, okay? Where's the learning? Is it in the muscles? Is it intellectual? Is it emotional? Connection with the music? Is it in relationship to culture, or is it relationship to your teacher? Is it in relationship to the instrument and the history of the instrument? Where's the learning? It's in the combining, right? And most of you, if you've learned to play any instrument or done anything like that in your life, what you know is that you can, in your muscles, know the thing, and you can, in your intellect, know the piece of music, and it cannot actually do the thing. It cannot be full of musicality. And then your heart breaks, and then you can play the piece of music. That there's associative learning across multiple contexts, through multiple contexts, something Dave and I would call abductive process, but we're not getting into that today. Okay, where's the learning? It's in the combining. But if I were to pull out all those aspects and say, well, here's how the muscle learned, and here's how the intellect learned, and here's the emotional learning, and here's the cultural learning, and here's the communication with the teacher, and here's this, and here's that, I still don't have the critical piece, which is how these things are changing each other. Okay, this is where the process and the idea of having like a giant spreadsheet that can hold all the context of the world so that you can get all the information and put it all together doesn't work. Because the question is not how do you put it all together, the question is how is it changing? Right? If I study each member of my family, and you get all the information on each one of them, you still are going to have no idea why the communication changes when one of us enters or leaves the room. Because it does, just like in your family. Right? So the entire relationships and possibilities of communication shift by who's in the room. How are we changing each other? What's happening with the way these different things shift each other? So this is where the idea for warm data came from. Not that button, this button, warm data. I keep sort of as my totem here, my small thing, is this meadow. This is a meadow that's outside my house in Sweden. And it keeps me honest. Because it's very tempting to fall down one groove or another of thinking about how life happens. But in a meadow, all the organisms are changing all the time. This meadow doesn't look like this right now. It's about to look like just brown. All the organisms are changing each other all the time. So how does a meadow continue to be a meadow? How does a meadow continue to be a meadow? And all the grasses are responding to the bacteria, and the bacteria are responding to the insects, and the insects are responding to the mammals, and the mammals are responding to the birds, and the birds are responding to the mammals, and everybody's responding to everybody. It can't be static. But the movement in it is disturbing. It makes it really hard to make a model. It makes it really hard to make a metric. It makes it really hard to grasp, to capture. So I'm thinking that's okay, because it's making life. All right, so in the lab that you were just in, I had absolutely no control over what anyone was going to say, or who you were going to be with, or what stories were going to come up. I did not tell you, please everybody be respectful to one another. You may have noticed. I assumed that those of you who are disrespectful would be anyway. But you were given room for some wilderness, some wildness of connection to take place. In your memories, I don't know what memories, you don't know what memories. In your stories, but someone else is talking, you don't know what they're going to say. You don't know how what they're going to say is going to remind you of something. And what will come up? What will you talk about? How will that shift? How will that move? So there's something wild allowed to happen, right? And at the end of it, there was no harvesting, right? Some of you will think about that for a couple of weeks, and 2 weeks from now, you might notice, oh yeah, I approached that really differently. Or something might shift, and with any luck, you won't even associate it to the Warm Data Lab. You won't even associate it, right? You won't even think, oh, well, this was really helpful, and I got this from the Warm Data Lab. I hope you don't think that. So in a meadow, in order for life to keep making the relationships that make life, all the organisms have to both continue and they have to discontinue. There are ways that they are in relationship that they have to continue. Right? They're going to need water, they're going to need this, they're going to need that. The lizards are going to keep eating insects. But what happens in those shifting relationships over time, across seasons, we don't know. Beep, beep, there we go. Oh, no, back. No, forward, there. Okay, so this picture, anybody who's been in any of my courses has seen this picture before. Have you seen this picture? Yeah, some of you have. So in this picture, there are these paint swatches, these blotches of pink and red and blue and black, and lines and shapes and colors. And you are combining them, each of you differently. You are combining them to form a cheekbone, a woman's face probably. I don't know, maybe not. But for me, a woman's face. Maybe she's got a little humor. Maybe she's a little pissed off. But this pink is marked by that red and this blue to together form for you something in your experience of a cheekbone. Right? There's no cheekbone there. But the different angles of the paint and the colors combine to remind you of an experience that you have had of cheekbones. So you are combining these different, as you do with all art, you're combining the different elements in the way that only you would to mean whatever it means to you in the moment. because the meaning changes even when you think about what's the meaning. But this guy, Ulrich Wereli, he did us the great favor. He wrote this book, Tidying Up Art. And he took out all of the black brush strokes, and he made them in a nice pile, and all the red ones, and the yellow ones, and the pink ones, and the blue ones. And now, as you see, we can make perfect sense of the painting. Now we get it. But this is very much how the world around us does information. Let's study the teenager at risk. Okay, well, what we're going to have is we're going to have all the information that the teacher and the school can get about the kid. And that's going to be grades, classroom behavior, maybe a little bit of school counselor. We're going to get all the information about that child's health, how they are with their vitals and their this and their that, their blood tests. We're going to get all the information of how they are legally. Have they been breaking the law? Are they legal? What's happening with that? We're going to get all the information about how they are in their technological life, what sites they go to, where they don't go. We're going to get everything we can out of their family about what they want for them. Who saw the kid? How do we respond to a living world if the information that we're responding with is not alive? And what does that mean? These lights are super fun. What does that mean to be working with living information, the information that's different for you than for you? So on the one hand, I could say this is an example of decontextualization. When you pull information out of context, it doesn't make any sense anymore. The problem is that's not what this is. The problem is that this is a recontextualization. And this information has been recontextualized into a world that we know as familiar. We took the information and we put it in the light where we could see it. So there are relational informations here. It's just a very different set of relationships. Do you see what I mean? Right? If we weren't still seeing in relationships, Prada and Gucci wouldn't have any value. We see in relationships. We're living creatures. That's all we see is relationships. Which ones are we seeing? I'm going to stop in a second. So transcontextual, we're looking at multiple contexts coming together. That's what you just did, right? So soup is lots of contexts, right? It's nutrition, it's culture, it's history, it's family, it's health, it's economy, it's politics and law, it's art, right? It's just a bowl of soup. But we are constantly engaging in a multi-contextual process that is combining. This is where we live. There's really nothing to be afraid of. It's where we live. It's just not how we organize information. So that's where the gap is. So warm data can be defined as information that's alive or transcontextual information about the interrelationships that integrate a complex system. When I was a kid, people used the word interconnected and ecology in my house, but they didn't use it that much in the world. And then, British Petroleum and Starbucks started using it. And then it started to mean this, that you could have lots of different nodes and you could connect them. And if things were connected, that was the important thing. But I don't have any relationships in my life that look like that. First of all, there's no symmetrical blue orbs. I've had to really work to use the word orbs in this slide. Second of all, they're not connected by lines. Right? If you were going to think about what's in the relationships, How would you describe a relationship? Most of us are actually pretty unable to do that. How do you describe a relationship? Oh, it's good, it's bad. Is it yellow? Does it smell like basil? Is it scratchy? Does it have lightning rods? Like, what's in the relationship? How do you describe relationship? All right. But this is interdependency. Right? And the way in which this insect has his legs, and the way that it can grip the moss, and the way that it can be green with brown antennae, and with the decomposing leaves, and the moss, and all right, this is interdependency. And the problem is that this invites a different kind of agency. This you look at and you say, I could do something. I can move this, I can shift that, I can do a thing. What are you going to do? Right? And on the one hand, this is kind of irritating because you feel like we got to do something. But if this is the world we're operating in, but this is the world that our operations are taking place in, we're liable to make really big mistakes. And the best meaning people, I am going backwards and forwards here, sorry. Okay, so, yeah. So I'm going to stop in just a second and open the room for questions. But if you look around, and you guys are probably pretty familiar with this set of logos, whether it comes in a square, in a rectangle, or in a circle, whatever. And you ask yourself, what does this image tell us about the kind of information that the people who are receiving it prefer? Right? What does it tell us about what people prefer? Well, we like boxes. We like numbers. We like labels. We like logos. We like everything to be symmetrical, like those blue orbs. Yeah, this is good. This is a good logo. But if you look at the projects here into which trillions have been spent, committees everywhere, of people really hoping to do the best they possibly can in the world, no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean air and water, affordable energy, decent work, industry innovation, okay, reduced inequalities, etc. Life on land, below water, climate action, peace, justice. Everything in that image is right here. Can you see it? If you're going to feed the babies in this gesture of life, making more life, life that makes more life, that makes relationships that make relationships, if you're going to feed the babies as mammals have to, the babies have to be able to feed the babies, and the people feeding the babies have to be able to feed their babies, and the people who make the clothes have to be able to feed their babies. And the bond between mother and child, the milk in her breast, there has to be clean air, there has to be clean water. You have to have communities of people that are caring for one another. You have to have inequality. You have to, like, everything you want here is right there. So this is a parallel image, okay, to this and this. Do you see the parallel? And these are a parallel image. This is why I didn't want too many slides today. No. It doesn't like that one slide. There we go. To this. Do you see? Good. We've accomplished something. So this is warm data. This is what I'm doing. It's what I got. I love to do this work. I get myself in all sorts of trouble. It's a vast, mischievous satisfaction to me to do this and to have there be no particular outcome. To let there be, with repeated, so if you were to do many more labs like you did today, I can tell you that you'd start to shift in them and start to perceive this multiple contextual combining more readily, like flying hours, you know? The more you fly, the more time you spend in this trans-contextual sort of soupy, blurry space. I almost feel bad after the lab saying, so what are you noticing? Because it's really like asking someone to describe a dream, and you can't. You can make words, but they're not what was in the dream. We all know that. But I guess in my work, what I am really kind of calling for and frustrated of is how hard this is. You know, we talk about uncertainty, we talk about ambiguity, we talk about complexity, but it's not easy to let go of that sort of neo-colonial informational package that has an authoritative ring and tone, and its whole meta-messaging is control. And as long as we are trying to control, we're not making space for the living processes, the shifting processes. But we don't know them when we see them, right? You know how many doctors go into this paralysis clinic and they don't see it. They can't see what's happening. Even when the patients walk out the door, they're like, what happened? There's no evidence. Oh. All right, we have 2 minutes. One question, comment. Come on, one person. Yes. Microphone.
If you can use the one. Yes, they are. Press the button.
Hear me now?
Wow,
Great.
It's like the Council of Europe. Cool.
So I love the fact that the warm data labs is not sort of directed towards an outcome. There are ways in which that you can learn things that can inform what you do elsewhere. I love the example you gave also about the spiral woodblock and how that's been used for rehabilitating people with paralysis. I was just wondering if the latter is an example of actually trying to achieve something using systemic practices, but it does have an intended outcome. And I know that you're talking about the dangers of trying to push a system in a direction, assuming that we know what's best for the system. Yeah, you still provided an excellent example of how that can be done in a way that's healthy and beneficial. So I was just, if you have any thoughts of not necessarily to try and turn the warm data labs approach in itself into something that's, teleological or functional, but what are your best tips about taking a systemic approach and an understanding of complexity and applying it in a way that is respectful of that and doesn't lose sight of what is its origins?
Yeah. Well, there is, of course, a paradox that you're pointing to. There's no point, and the point is that there's no point, so that means there's a point. Yeah, and it's the same with the paralysis clinic, right? That what they have recognized is that the combining processes must be wild. They must find each other in the way that they do uniquely and in each configuration at very, very granular, detailed levels. right? So the big picture is to create the conditions in which those different processes can combine anew, can find new, what I would call a productive processes. They find each, shape each other in new ways. So the visual process is shaping the visual process, is shaping the tactile process, is shaping the memory processes are changing each other. So the task is not in the way of that. It's probably the hardest thing for us to face. You know, in the 60s, it was super cool to, like, you know, drop acid and have free sex, and that was how you broke loose of the societal norms. But in this moment, breaking loose of the societal traps looks a little something like that. It's very incoherent to people. Really hard to get a grant. Yeah, okay. Amit is coming to tell me that I must stop. Yes, because we really must stop.
Yes.
Thank you.
So we're at the end of the day almost, except that there is more.